So what I'd like to suggest is that we just take a roll call attendance and get started as quickly as possible. And let's see what we can get done tonight, recognizing that that may be a lot or a little. But let me start with a roll call vote. Sorry, attendance. Susan Franklin. You're on mute, Susan.
Susan Franklin here.
Great. Corey Evans.
Corey Evans here.
Michael Dick.
Michael Dick here.
Okay. So again,
Brian,
Francine,
before you begin,
yeah,
I sent an email out to the committee questioning the agenda that we have for tonight.
Yeah.
That it is overloaded, that we as a committee have not had any time to actually discuss these items. We've barely got some information, not all information, that had been requested. So I would like to ask that we set a time limit for tonight and that we schedule meetings for next week and the week after to get through this agenda in a thoughtful, careful way, rather than feeling pushed or pressured to come up with recommendations. So I leave that for our committee to discuss.
Okay. So hopefully everyone's received Michael's email. Is that the case? Has everyone received it, had a chance to look at it? Okay. I'm just going to throw out an alternative perspective on the situation. I think, I've been very candid for months now that, we were going to run out of time on this. So I'm not surprised by where we are. Michael, I think your assessment is accurate in terms of not having all the information that we'd like to have. That said, I think we need to do whatever it is we collectively as a group feel comfortable with at this moment in time, recognizing that the warrant is going to print tomorrow. I just want to acknowledge that Francine Lyons and Ralph Normanser have joined the meeting. And we're going to have a really open conversation on each of these items as to whether or not people feel they have the information they need in order to make a vote. Okay. There may be a lot of information that we'd like to have, but I think each one of us needs to be intellectually honest with ourselves as to whether or not that would actually change our vote. And if we can't vote any of this, then that's, I think, an accurate assessment of where we are. People feel comfortable voting it. That too is an accurate assessment of where we are. So I do completely agree with Michael in the context that there's information missing. I do completely agree that no one should feel compelled to do something that they don't feel confident in. But I do think we should assess each one of these items and take a realistic inventory of where we are and whether or not each of us is individually ready to vote, and whether or not there's information that would change that vote. And let's just see where that goes.
There's one thing you're missing, though, Brian.
Which is?
Discussion. Sufficient time to offer our pros and cons and work out our concerns amongst ourselves. We have a very good group here. We listen to each other. And without that discussion, without sufficient time for discussion, then we're rubber stamping this agenda in hopes of meeting a deadline to get our approvals in print.
If there's a discussion that would change the way an individual would vote, then we should have that discussion. But if fundamentally people aren't ready to vote on something tonight, there's not a need to discuss it. We should discuss the things where maybe people are ready to vote. And on the flip side, if people are completely ready to vote and don't need to discuss it, then anyone that does need to discuss it should discuss it. And the rest of us can certainly participate. But I don't want to preordain any one of these items. Some of these may go through instantaneously. Some of them may be completely irreconcilable for tonight. I just think at the front end of a meeting, I don't want to predetermine any of this stuff. So
what about setting a time limit?
I don't want to be here all night.
What about setting a time limit for our meeting tonight? Or are we willing to go indefinitely tonight?
I don't think we're willing to go indefinitely. I also don't want to preordain, an artificial stop. In the past, we've targeted 2 hours. I think that's a realistic target. In the past, if we were making progress and people, wanted to continue on, when we did a time check at the 2 hour mark, we as a group have collectively decided to do that. So, I do think we should be realistic about, if we're discussing an item ad nauseum and we're going in circles and it's not getting resolved, we should table it and move on. I think that's the key. So that's what I'd like to suggest, but I'm certainly, interested in hearing if there are any other members of the committee that have a view on this. Anyone? Okay, I'm going to put everyone on the hot seat then. Ralph, I'll start with you since you're not a voting member. How would you like to see this go tonight?
No, I suppose I need to make a top level sort of observation. We're talking about somewhere in the order of $22 million, $23 million of additional spending by the town. And the taxpayers are going to pick up the difference.
Yeah.
That's what it's about. My primary concern, top level, okay, is that not all of these projects or all of the potential warrant articles, quite frankly, have been fully vetted in many ways. So I do tend to agree with Michael Dick that whether or not I know the answers or have just simply not been available because I've obviously been away a lot, but nevertheless, I'm not sure I have an answers on some of them. And I'll give you just one typical example, and I don't want to go because it'll be coming up anyway. I understand why we want to go to 1 Pleasant Street, but I also understand, or do not understand, quite frankly, what we want to do with the existing annex, how much it will cost to do whatever we want to do, or what's realistic there. Or
you're saying on the existing town hall, Ralph?
I'm talking about the annex portion of the existing town hall. Yeah, right.
I mean, it's not on the warrant.
That's the issue. In other words, okay. 1 Pleasant is on the warrant, but there are issues ultimately going to come up costing money, which are incurred by going to 1 Pleasant Street, which says there has to be some accounting for what in fact will be done there. So, and I don't want to go on with that because obviously I could talk about several of these, but broadly, like Michael Dick, I'm saying to myself, there are things that have not been really sort of sorted out, whether or not maybe Chris or Gene or someone else who's on this line can clear those up. But in fact, the total cost of each of these items ought to be real. That's all. So simple enough. Okay.
Okay. I mean, we can certainly give Chris and Gene a shot when we get to these items. I don't want to do it in advance. I don't think anyone's disagreeing that this is imperfect information. Susan, thoughts?
Well, I definitely think there are some things we need to vet a little bit more. There was information that we didn't yet have that I think some of it has come in since, and we may hear some directly in the meeting, which would be helpful. But I do agree that there are some items that we'll be able to debate more quickly than others. And I think that we should just start moving towards whatever we can get done.
Okay, Francine?
For me, I think I just haven't been able to make some of the meetings, many of the meetings. So I'm certainly not as up to speed as the rest of you. So I'll participate where I can, but I don't want to slow the process just because of my absence.
Okay, Corey?
I agree really with how Susan phrased it. At least for me, we had a great conversation last week about especially the school stabilization fund. So I've got comfort with that. I've got comfort with maybe the roads and sidewalks, comfort talking about it to the point where maybe I could vote is what I'm saying at this point. The other projects, there's a lot there. And there's other things which we're just learning about now. So I'm looking forward to learning more about this. I'm not kind of prejudging it, but I'm aware of the kind of the giant mass of stuff that's still to be
okay. So it sounds like it sounds like there is a feeling, at least among several members, that some of these items are votable tonight. Is that? So what I'd like to suggest as we go through this, and people will either move the questions or they won't, and they'll either get seconded or they won't. And probably before we move, we should just poll quickly to see who's actually ready to vote an item so that we know how many votes to expect in the event that there is a move in a second. And if it doesn't feel right, then, you know, maybe we don't move. But I'd like to at least get done what we can get done tonight and agree that if something can't get done, for Michael's point, it's on the agenda for next week. And we're just going to keep working on this until we get to town meeting. I think we'd all be shocked if we get through all of this tonight with all of this voted. So, you know, with that as a background, I'd like to get started. The first item that actually appears in the warrant, Chris, we're gonna need a little help from you on this, is actually one-time costs. And there are 3 items in there that are capital items that we've never heard of before. So these look relatively straightforward. So if you could give us a quick summary, and then we can ask questions, deliberate it. And if people feel comfortable on these, given the simplicity of them, then let's at least get them off the list.
Can we get
Okay.
these visible on screen, please?
Sure. Hold on. Let me put them up for you. I just sent all, all of you should have the updated warrant. I did email it to you folks. And let me know if you can see this. Can you see this now?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
That is where we are. So Brian, you're talking about the
cemetery software and the ADA playground
Okay,
upgrades.
right. So the cemetery software has been discussed. That's coming out of cemetery plot sales. This is kind of a follow-up to what we did last year. We did 2 years ago when we actually did the hard copy records. So those have all been cleaned. Now they got to be. We need new software to actually manage the system going forward. These are funds that are set up for this purpose, right? These are special purpose funds only for the cemetery. There's now a process. There's not that many. I don't think there's that many different ones out there. I've not been personally involved in the selection of the software, but I know that IT is working with Glenn, and I believe Glenn's in the audience. I was trying to get him promoted, but if you can answer any questions, but that's what that is. It's desperately needed. It's not even, and this is the most appropriate place to take the money from because it's dedicated for these purposes. The next 2 are just.
Before we move on from that, let's just hit these one at a time, Chris.
Sure.
Just a quick question on this. So this software has been selected by Glenn and his team, and he's working directly with Ron Menard to make sure that we're comfortable from an IT perspective. This is the right choice.
My understanding is they're working. I don't know if they select the software, but they're working to select software, right? And this is the ballpark
Okay.
based on what they understand. So
That was my only question. Does anyone else have any further questions on the cemetery software?
No.
No, I do not.
Sorry, I heard a voice. Was that you, Susan?
That was me. I said I don't have any further questions.
Okay. All right, Chris, if you want to move on to the ADA.
So there are ongoing accessibility issues at both the Sawyer Street and Beechwood playgrounds. For Sawyer Street, this funding will put in the accessible pathways, which are basically rubber mats that kind of interlock and are designed to go, and that would allow the various pieces of equipment to be accessed. The one for Beechwood is there just as a fail-safe. If for some reason the CPC article does not go forward, this does need to be done. So if CPC if the vote is to support the CPC brand new playground, that will already have port in place workers. So this won't be necessary. So the motion, and you can see, if you can see here, if the Beechwood playground is approved in Article 6, the funds for this will be returned for other uses, so they won't be spent. So this is just a fail-safe because we have to have it done. We have to show that we're actually doing the work. Okay. So that's what those are, and that you can ignore the last one because that's coming off, so you can ignore this.
Okay. So one question, there was, if I recall correctly, there was some discussion of an ADA accessible grant funding some of the accessibility stuff, both at Sawyer and Beechwood. Is that the source of funds here? Or is this,
No.
or is that just a hope that comes and we're funding it out of free cash, but wouldn't do that if the grant comes through?
Yeah, so in terms of Sawyer Street, for Beechwood, that's correct. So the more elaborate cost would be paid for by the ADA grant, but we won't know about that till December. So we won't, in terms of Sawyer Street, I don't know if there's enough money in the grant to cover Sawyer Street as well. Michelle could probably answer that, but I don't think there is. So these are based on actual quotes that Michelle got for the materials. So
Okay. So there might be some grant buy down, in which case these monies would be relinquished.
correct.
Possibly. Okay. Does anyone else have any questions about the ADA accessibility upgrades to the playgrounds?
No questions.
Okay. Does anyone feel we need additional information prior to voting this item?
No.
Okay. Would somebody like to make a motion?
So Brian, do we make the motions individually on each of these or?
With this one in particular, given, well, I guess the question is, does anyone see themselves splitting votes, voting for the ADA but not the cemetery software? If your vote is going the same direction, then we should just vote them as a group.
Okay.
Without asking which direction your vote's going. But if your vote for the three items is all three of those would go in the same direction. Let's just vote them as a group would be my suggestion.
Okay.
Okay, doesn't sound like anyone has split votes on this. So I would entertain a motion on this.
So move.
Thank you, Corey. So your motion is what?
Motion to recommend the items as presented to us in the current draft warrant for
In Article 4?
one-time costs. Yes.
Okay, so that would include the cemetery, the capital.
Motion to
items.
recommend. My apologies. I'm
Okay.
using my old terminology.
All right, and that would be the capital items only. So the cemetery software, the ADA accessibility at Sawyer Street, and the ADA accessibility at Beechwood Playground. Is that?
Mhm.
Correct. Yeah, and the language said that it would be pulled out if other things happened. So that was
Okay.
my only.
All right. Would anyone like to second the motion?
Second,
Great. Let's do a roll call vote. Susan Franklin,
Susan Franklin, aye.
Francine Lyons,
Francine Lyons, aye.
Michael Dick,
Mike Dick, aye.
Corey Evans,
Corey Evans, aye.
and Brian Host, aye. Ralph, just a comment. I know we love to seek your views on things, but just having read the bylaw, I'm actually not supposed to ask you to vote. But if you'd like to signal with a thumbs up or thumbs down, just so we know where your heart is on this, your views are always of value to us. Thank you. All right, look at that. We actually voted an article. I know we're not going to have that much luck with all of these, but we got one done anyway. Let's move on to the next article, which is, I believe, Article 5 for Town Hall. And Chris, if you could pull this language back up, that would be great. Okay, we still have Chris.
See it?
We see it.
Okay.
Okay. So there's not a specific price in the warrant language. I take it that would be in the town manager's motion. What is the latest number, Chris, all in?
It's still 10 million. That hasn't changed.
10 flat. Okay.
Yeah, and I apologize. I'm trying to. Oh, there we go. I couldn't turn my video back on. The reason there isn't a number in the article is because of the CP. If the CPC funding is approved, that would bring the number down and all of that. So that
Okay.
there's still a degree of flexibility. This is the cap. 10 million is the top number,
Yeah.
but it could still be lower. So
10 million minus whatever CPC throws in. Is that the bottom line?
yes.
Okay. Into the language. Okay, so you're not going to set the amount until you know what's going to town meeting, but it's 10 minus whatever CPC throws in.
Yeah. The motion's likely to read something like 10 million less any additional funds allocated by town meeting through CPC or other,
Okay.
articles.
All right, but the number's 10.
Yeah, that hasn't changed. Yeah.
Okay. And among many questions that were outstanding, the single biggest question was really with regards to the economics surrounding the residential units. I know you sent a spreadsheet over a little while ago. I had a chance to glance at it, but if you could pull that up and perhaps walk us through it, that would be helpful.
Give me just a second on that. Okay, can everyone see this as best as I'm able to get on the screen?
Yes.
There we go. Make it a little bit bigger, make it easier to see. So there are 13 units here, 1 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms. The rent that you see here in column C is based on the current, if I understand it, Michelle can correct me if I'm misstating this, the current rents that are being used for the full base affordable 80% median income at the preserve here in Cohasset. So these are rents that are already established for 1 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms. And again, remember, this is a number that can go up every year too. So, but this is I believe what they currently are. And these next set of, it should be 5%, sorry. The property management fee, the estimates that Michelle has found are between 10 and 15%, pick 12 as a, kind of a midpoint. Expenses are what has been estimated based on some of the conversations, again, that have been had with some management firms, that we actually have to have those for sure. A vacancy rate of 5% is what, again, has been determined as a safe one based on once people are in there seems to be a fair demand. So these are the annual rent numbers with a total of 345.6. Less the management fee, less the expense numbers, the vacancy rate gives you that gross number, or that net number, I should say, of 217. There's 2 other fees that we're sure of at this point, because anytime someone leaves, you still have to go through a lottery process. So the annual fee for that, from what we've been told, is about $6,500. And the initial setup, so the first time you do it, it's $15,000. So actually, I don't know if we actually have to pay both the first year, but I put it in there anyway just to be safe, right? Mm-hmm. So we're not talking about huge amounts of money there. So the net right now is just less than $200,000 or 196, with an understanding that a lot of the expenses should include like elevator inspections and stuff like that. We're still looking to get an insurance quote for the whole building. Obviously, the renters themselves have to carry their own insurance for the units, but we still have to carry insurance on the first floor and the building as a whole, for operation purposes. And all the tenants have to pay their own utilities. So, electricity, gas, or heat, electricity, water, sewer, those are all utilities that are paid by the tenants. And we're still gonna have to work up what the number is for the first floor. But those are all the energy use should be better. The building's up to modern code. So what it'll cost to heat and cool, I guess we'll have to see. But right now, town hall all in, the current building I'm sitting in, it's about $100,000 for all the various miscellaneous things. That's utilities and a bunch of other stuff. It should be less for this building. But again, we're gonna have to really start drilling down over the next few weeks as facility starts to understand what the systems are gonna look like. and what some of these specs on those systems are.
Okay, so in the expenses column E, that 20% number does not include utilities for the residential units.
Correct.
Okay, that's just an allocation of, everything from elevator inspections to insurance.
Well,
to
yeah, fixing plumbing, a plumbing leak,
Yeah.
somebody has to repaint something, it's that kind of stuff.
Okay,
Chris, Brian, I'm sorry.
please go ahead. Sorry, your hands up.
So just for more clarification, I don't want to interrupt you while talking. The property management fee, your words were, these are these are rates that Michelle has found, and they're between 15. Can you define that a little bit more clearly? Is that quotes you've received? Is that just research we've done online? What is that Michelle has found 12% number mean?
So I can answer that.
Yeah.
So if you take local properties in the area, those are what are to be considered affordable rents at the 80% rate. So
no, I'm sorry, Michelle. I'm talking about the property management fee, not the
property
rental.
management fee. I've called 4 different property management companies, and they've all indicated the same percentage. They said just hold the same percentage. Some will be higher, some may be lower. It all depends on really how we manage this. If we deem all of these units affordable and there's more work for the person doing the lottery system, likely there'll be less work for the property manager because now they're not vetting all the tenants. So it's less work for them. So it's just a percentage based on an average
of things that based on what you've had conversations with property managers in the area who may or may not be part of the pool. Okay.
Correct. Yep.
That's great. Thank you.
Sure.
I have other ones too, but I'll wait for everybody.
I have a question on these expenses. Could you put that spreadsheet back up, please? So, do expenses include personnel for maintaining the common areas in the residential areas, janitorial services? What goes into expenses?
Yep,
That's
so
number one. And
so-
number two, we have discussed in the past putting in some amount of amortization or depreciation into the rents or into the revenue stream. Maybe I should say it better that way, so that we're building up a kitty to take care of maintenance into the future. So is this 20% realistic, and what's the risk? How accurate is this number, or is it kind of squishy?
So Mike, I think I can answer that in a couple of different ways. So these expenses, yes, you're exactly right. It will cover expenses such as janitorial services of common areas. It will cover, elevator maintenance if need be. It'll cover, I guess, out of the ordinary expenses that we don't plan for. As far as the rest, this is only for the apartment units. This has nothing to do with the rest. So the custodial staff that currently maintains Town Hall would be maintaining the rest of this building as well as the parking lot in the exteriors.
Does that mean hiring more people to cover a larger area?
Nope. There's no need to hire any additional staff. The property management company, this 12% fee, they have an entire staff of facilities workers themselves who will maintain the units individually.
Okay.
This 20% expense is the common area, and it's just to hold additional money aside. Your question about the kitty is if you look in column L, all of that money is what's going to be set aside for future maintenance of the property. So however the select board deem to hold the funds. That is going to be essentially the profit on these units that can be set aside for maintenance in the future.
So column L is reserved for this building and will not be used or sought after for other reasons related to town hall, whether it's the new town hall proposed at 1 Pleasant Street or the existing historic town hall and annex at 41 Highland Ave. These amounts are reserved and are not to be touched. Am I correct on that?
So
I
Brian, I
bel-
think I can answer if you want. The select board discussed this on Tuesday night, or maybe the prior Tuesday night. So you'll see that there is a note that says the remaining income would be placed into a Chapter 40, Section 3 account for the upkeep of the facility. This is essentially a revolving fund the select board can create and hold in escrow each year with respect to the rental income for the purpose of everything that's on this sheet, right? And the select board has decided that at least in the initial year until we get stabilized and have a more realistic sense of our expenses, we want to keep everything in this fund as a reserve. That said, there may be future years where we decide we don't want to keep the entirety of $200,000, particularly if we have a big reserve in that account. And, I think there's going to be some flexibility on that point, because we may, for example, want to take some of that money, let's say 100,000, and begin doing repairs at existing town hall if we already have a very large reserve, instead of having the money sit there or hitting the capital stabilization fund, et cetera, for other items. But in the interim, until we get to that point, we want to be conservative and put that money all into the upkeep of the facility fund.
But there's no guarantee that it won't last more than 1 year. That it won't be reserved for more than 1 year, that you're basically reserving the right for the select board to use that money elsewhere.
That's what the state statute says. This is the select board that makes the decision under state law as to that particular fund.
state law
So
says
we do
what?
think it's appropriate that we keep that money aside instead of just putting it into the general fund or, wherever it will go. We want to make sure we have reserves for the building.
Mike, can I tee off of that a little bit, if you don't mind?
Please.
So, I think it'd be helpful to see, the language of the creation of that fund, because I do think I think what we're all saying is, the purpose of the fund is to ensure that we have money in the future for what's coming down. And the language of the fund would kind of clear up at least what the fund could be used for. And then we'd at least have some guardrails on exactly what we're talking about. And then some back of the napkin math, because Michael, you asked about depreciation, and I had the same thing. If it's $10 million building and you're depreciating over 27.5 years, you're talking about $36,000 a year of depreciation that we should be putting in that fund. And that should be part of the policy as well, that, we have that expectation of the fund will not dip below a certain depreciation amount. That way we don't have this giant thing, coming at us in 20 years or 15 years when the building needs significant maintenance.
Corey, I think you
Good
missed a
question.
0 on that depreciation.
What did I say?
36,000, I think.
36,000 per year. Yeah,
For
over 27 and a half
years,
years, right?
Gets you to about $1 million.
Then I missed it. One, sorry about that. I'm doing this while also putting kids to bed. Yeah, I missed a 0. So it's $363,000 a year of depreciation.
Of book depreciation.
Of book depreciation. We can use
Right.
whatever factor we have. I just pulled that out because that's kind of common. But we should set some number for that and figure out what it is. That way we have expectations for what is going to be set aside for, because this is going to be a pot of money, and everyone, as we know, there's needs everywhere. But I think what Gene was alluding to is you don't want to have a kitty that's built up that gets rated, and then we basically hurt ourselves in the future. So it's probably not, you also don't have to appreciate the whole building because we're using some of it. I mean, but some sort of depreciation schedule on the building should be part of the policy and part of this chart too. I think one of the advisory members brought it up too.
Yeah, so just thinking out loud here, this is a pretty dynamic conversation, but really the depreciation is on the residential portion, at least as you think about this, and the rest of it's kind of on the town. But
right,
the other thing to think about is, I mean, it really, we're not going to be replacing the walls, right, in the building. It's really the major components. It's the roof, it's the HVAC systems, it's the windows and doors that will need to be replaced on that, call it 25-year cycle.
It could be the walls inside, right? I mean, you've got rentals here. I mean, that's kind of why you count for this. And 20 years of wear on inside wall will need to be repaired.
Yeah.
Appliances.
I have a couple more questions.
Michael, go ahead.
Small question on trash pickup. How is that handled and who's responsible?
So the trash pickup would be part of one of the expenses. It would be private trash pickup.
Okay, so the rent includes what exactly? Is it heat, hot water, trash, but not
all of
water,
the
not sewer?
all of the utilities are separate, with the exception of trash removal. Trash removal will be on site and will be part of the rent.
Okay, and that's been calculated in.
Yes.
Okay. Another more important question, a larger question. I understand completely the desire of the select board to make all of these apartments affordable with a preference for town employees. But what I've been hearing from the Affordable Housing Trust meeting, which I viewed, thank you, Corey, for sending that around, is that you may not necessarily get those tenants that you're after. That it's entirely possible that you might get one or two people who wish to be resident who work for the town, but it all depends on the timing of people's lives when they're ready to move and when an apartment opens up. Now, this is what I heard at the Affordable Housing Trust meeting. So all this to say, the town taxpayers are being asked to pay out of their pockets a subsidy, basically, for these apartments because we're going for a debt exclusion. And my interest is to see to it that that debt exclusion is at the lowest possible number it can be. And if we can have X number of apartments at market rate to increase the income from these apartments and direct it back towards that debt exclusion and retire that debt earlier to benefit the town's taxpayers who are shelling out, I would urge that. It's very nice to have this approach. It's very socially, it's an excellent idea, but you're asking the town to underwrite it. We're not getting a grant from somewhere to help us with that. It's coming directly from the taxpayer. So again, I'll make the point that I urge that we have X number of market rents directed towards reducing the debt associated with this project.
Mike, can I add something to kind of that thought process, which is, we just talked about this fund here. And part of the policy, I guess, really should be, does some of the income go towards paying down that debt? I mean, so we may actually find that if we have some money left over, whether it's affordable or not, we can shorten the debt load to the town, we can shorten it up, and that can be part of the policy. The other thing is, I think there's been a lot of things bounce around: market rate, workforce, capital A, 40B, 80% AMI, 100% AMI. If we could get a projection of what the rents look like over the next 10 years, we may see that the delta is not that much, right? We may see like, hey, this is either, you know, market rent, we're walking away from $4 million, or market rent, we're only walking away from a little bit. So I think having the projection of what these could be going forward, I don't know how we do that, but I think that would give us some clarity about what we're really looking at down the road. How much is that decision going to cost the town in the form of lost revenue that we can't apply to the debt service, right? Because that's really what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Is how do we get out from the debt as quickly as possible? So if we had those three projections, we could then see what it looks like.
So Corey, when would you want to see those projections in order to make a decision on how to price the apartments?
Before I make a recommendation, I want to see that, because the vote will be based on the understanding of the money. And I'm not saying that either way at this point. I don't have the projections, but I think that's one of the pieces of data that's very important to me, looking at this financially, to understand, you know, what is the financial impact of what is a policy decision, which is admirable and may be the best way to go. But at least I have a number for that. And we can look at it and, you know, say that we've done our due diligence on that part.
Agreed.
I have a question, Michelle. In terms of the rents,
Jean had her hand up there, Brian. You might have missed that.
Sorry, who has their hand up?
I don't want to jump in front of the chair, though. I have an answer, but I don't want to jump in front.
No, go ahead, Jean. I had a different question, so please, if you have an answer.
Okay. I don't think that the select board, at least the select board, is going to be necessarily inclined to pursue market rent units. I think we feel strongly about the need for affordable housing in Cohasset. You look at our Cohasset production plan that was signed by the select board in 2020. There's a huge need for affordable housing in Cohasset. It's one of our goals. If our goal is simply to do financially prudent from just a sheer numbers, we won't have the Affordable Housing Trust, arguably. And there is a social goal we're trying to reach. There's projections of a huge amount of seniors that are going to need affordable housing within Cohasset. And so I just don't think that's realistic. And I want to be transparent about that. That said, at the same time, I do think that the market rates are very close to the affordable housing rates when you look at the area median income and how high they are in Cohasset when push comes to shove. And I also want to be clear too about what we're going to do and what we're not going to do. We are going to be hiring an approved property manager that works with DHCD to do the appropriate local preferences. If this passes, for example, it's not just municipal employees, it can be employees of local businesses, of current residents, of children, households with children attending locality schools like Metco. Because whether we do affordable housing or market rate housing, we also have to be mindful of FHA requirements to avoid discriminatory and disparate impacts in how we rent units. And so I feel strongly that we actually are going to have a lot more legally compliant household if we work through the DHCD process, where we're going to be not only doing a positive thing that we know Cohasset needs in terms of affordable housing, it will be at a price point that's very close to market rate units, but we'll also have, I think, a strong program with a lottery manager under the auspices of DHCD, because we'll have to do an approved market plan and a whole bunch of other things that I think make sense. And now Corey will correct me, but I am agreeing with you, Corey, that I do think there's not a lot of daylight. And that's what we're hearing from property managers too, incidentally, who are actually doing this day in and day out in Cohasset. And Michelle can confirm that you know, the prices aren't so different.
I was just going to, again, I guess to the point of what we have in front of us, you know, and Jean obviously only said probably, you know, 5% of what there is to know here, you know, and our task is the numbers, and there's some numbers we still don't have. Is this an appropriate time to table this for another meeting? I know we've got other questions, but, you know, I don't want to get us down too many rabbit holes to the point where we can't get out of them anymore, and then we can't get anything else done tonight. So
it's a fair question, Corey. I had a couple of questions top of mind that I'd like to ask before we decide whether or not we want to continue, just because they're top of mind. I'm going to forget them otherwise. But first, I want to just follow up on Jean's comment that Michelle might have a view on sort of the daylight between the affordable housing rents and the actual market rents. Keeping in mind the exact location of this building. I'm just curious, Michelle, if you have a view on that. And then secondly, I'm curious what the escalation rules are in terms of the affordable housing rates once a tenant is in. How do rates move up over time, or are they fixed, or is it rent control? I mean, how does the rate move, and will it move? Should it move lockstep with market, or is it completely different where it's fixed and people get in there for 40 years and they're paying the future equivalent of a very below market rent?
So I think I can partially answer that question, but not totally. So as far as market rents versus the affordable rents, I don't have a full analysis on that, but I can certainly provide that as soon as tomorrow. I just have to pull some market rents in the area.
Okay.
As far as affordable rates, the way I understand it is they get in with an affordable rate. It can be escalated annually, 10% or whichever, or it's 10% or something having to do with the median income. So I'd have to get that calculation for you, but we did talk about that today, very high level. I can certainly get the calculation for you. But it's not that they come in at $2,000 and then in 40 years, they're only at $2,800. Yeah,
Right.
no. So there is a calculation they use. So I can get that for you tomorrow.
Yeah, I may or may not have had one of those apartments in New York in the early 90s. So it
Why
can
are
get
you
very
here?
disconnected. Can get very disconnected from market. Okay. And Ralph, I see your hand is up. Let me just hit my second question. My second question is probably more for Jean than anyone else. The chapter 40, I think it was, fund that the surpluses are going to go into. Is there, besides the fact that you already stated it's a sort of a select board discretionary fund, are there any limitations as to how that money can be used? Can it be used for operating budget? Can it be used for literally anything that the select board chooses?
No, it's not. You can do whatever you want with it. What it is and can be used for is, and I'm going to read the language of the statute. The money shall be expended by the board, committee, or department in control of the building or property without further appropriation for the upkeep of the facility, so rented or leased. Any balance, blah, 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 may be expended for the upkeep and maintenance of any facility under the control of the board, committee, or department head in control of the building or property. What I would say is, and I know Mr. Senior and I have been talking about this, is there is a provision that appears that the money may revert into the general fund at the end of the fiscal year. I'm not sure if we can maintain that as like an escrow account off to the side. And so we've been talking about creating a revolving fund that more formally through the next town meeting, if this passes, to allow us to essentially leave that money sitting in there as a reserve fund. That's the only one where I know we can definitely do it for the year.
Yeah.
It's not completely clear to me whether it all reverts back into the general fund, any excess left, which would sort of defeat the purpose. That's why
Yes,
we're
it
trying
would.
to nail that down.
Yeah,
Right.
it certainly would. And if I heard you correctly, the money could be used for any building that's under the select board's control. Is that accurate? Not just the building that it came from?
You could change that in policy, though. I mean,
But yeah, I'm just reading the words of the statute right now.
why don't you get back to us on that? I mean, I think you understand
Okay.
where we're going with it. Let's get it nailed down.
Well, Leah,
I think we're all on the same page about
let
what
me cut straight to the end. So the one thing I'm trying to reconcile, I think what you're hearing in various different ways is people would love to see this money used in ways that they feel comfortable with. and not just sort of sucked off into the ether or used into, personally, I'll just say it out loud. I don't really want to see this money go into operating budgets. We've got plenty of capital projects and buildings that, are going to need maintenance. So I feel very strongly about that. But what I'm really most focused on is sort of a question I'm kicking around in my head, to Michael's point, we're funding this building with an override. The taxpayers are funding this building, right? With a new tax. It's excluded debt. It's not. So, whatever surplus comes off of this, should we in fact be, stockpiling it for other buildings? Or should we be, frankly, using it to, reduce the cost of the taxpayers who funded the building, and then just deal with the out-of-pocket capital costs on the building when they come up? I mean, it's an interesting question, and one that I haven't resolved in my head, but I just put that out there, and if people have views, it's fair game.
I see that
Brian, Ralph has his hand up. Oh, sorry, Gene.
Okay, okay, Ralph.
Yeah. One thing occurs to me that you have an expert in this town named Michael Putziger, who manages probably in the thousands of these units as his business. It would be useful to actually have someone like that talk a little bit about these questions and give us some insights. I don't know of anybody who would know more than he does and is more directly involved in exactly that business than he is. Has anyone actually reached out to him to ask or even pose any of these questions to him?
I've got a guy that I contacted, Ralph, but not your guy.
I will say I have not. I don't think Michelle has. We've been talking with folks that are managing local properties here of comparable size. I don't know if Michael manages any of those or is involved with that, but thank you, Ralph, for the lead on Mr. Putt.
He is absolutely the expert in all of this, no doubt. The other question I would raise is, my understanding is that most of the times when people leave any of these units, there is a complete refurbish is required. Has that been considered in any of the calculations that have been done? And refurbish means repaint all the walls, often replace all of the carpets and that sort of thing. Is that been factored into any of the expenses shown?
Yep. So that 20%, Ralph, does take into account turnover, which would be painting. There's no carpeting in the building, so we don't have to worry about the carpeting, but it does take into account repainting as well as maybe appliance repair or replacement.
Okay, thanks.
Refinishing floors.
So that's all included in the 20%.
I've got an off-the-wall question, which I don't know if anyone here can answer. There was a BOR story that I caught on the radio and then was online about empty affordable housing across the state. And it noted that Cohasset had 12 empty affordable housing units. Do we have any idea like what the holdup is? I'm just looking at this going, well, if we're counting on this income in year one, but we don't see the income for 2 or 3 years, I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but that kind of flagged me as if we have 12 empty units, why are they empty and what's the holdup? And should we calculate that into what we're talking about? And is it going to be hard to refill them later on?
Sure.
I don't really know. You go ahead, Michelle.
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I did reach out to Colleen, who's the director over at our housing authority. And she did indicate that we do have vacant units. The reason for the vacancy simply is the affordability requirements that the applicant pool that they have is not a fit with the units they have available. She did, though, say that there's 3,000 people on the waiting list.
I saw that too.
Yeah, and they haven't had the staff to go through all the applications. So it sounds to me more like it's a staffing issue than a fit issue. But I can share the email with you that she sent.
And is the misfitment because the apartments are too expensive or too cheap? If you know what I mean, is it because the AMI requirement is? Go ahead.
They're too cheap. they're not, they can't put people in the units.
Are
And
they like a 50% AMI or something? Is that what it
Yeah.
is? Is that
and
wow,
it's
okay.
because they can't pass the reference checks, the
Okay.
credit checks, because they still are vetted.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
So what does that leave us with in terms of risk of having vacant apartments that can't be filled?
Let's follow up with Michelle and whoever manages this.
Yeah, we'd be looking at a different risk profile. For the 4 units that are deeded restricted, that would be 80% AMI. But then we have the ability with the remaining 9 units to go to a much higher AMI. I believe it's 110, if not 120. So there you're looking at someone who could be making up to $120,000, which then opens up, including to our teachers, our firefighters. That's why we're disinclined to deed restrict the remaining units, because of the concern that if we restrict the AMI too much, it's going to, carve out people that would otherwise need and want workforce or other housing to remain in Cohasset, but their income is too high. So we're trying to, work to preserve all options that way.
Well, so I'm still trying to figure out exactly what AMI we're targeting, because we've got a spreadsheet here, and I was led to believe this is an 80% AMI affordable rent chart. Is that not? And so you're saying the whole building isn't going to be 80% AMI. It's going to be, the quote unquote, not, the workforce, which is up to 110. Do you have a breakdown of that? Because that changes a lot of these calculations.
Well, this is very conservative, right? So we're looking at.
Well, so what is this number then in this chart? Is it 80%?
This is 80% AMI, as Michelle said, but we're not necessarily going to stick with 80% AMI. At the end of the day, we could be charging higher rents because it's a higher AMI in order to do that workforce housing. That's our intent. And that's why we're hiring this lottery manager, assuming this passes. So again, these are all very conservative numbers, and we could be making more.
Well, so can you nail down whatever that split is with your board? And that way, when you get it back, we can look at, okay, these 4 are 80%, these other are 110. Because that also is to Mike's question, right? And if the 110 gets us near market and it still allows us to do a lottery process, whatever, that's important to know. So if you can nail down whatever that split is, that makes these numbers a lot easier to understand.
So Brian, I'll take that back. But the one thing that I wanted to say that I said to advisory yesterday is there's one way to guarantee that this revolving fund is at 0, and the taxpayer has to pay the full debt exclusion amount, which is not to vote for One Pleasant Street. Because all the rest of the buildings that the select board has been looking at, including when you were on the select board, Corey, don't present the same opportunity that One Pleasant Street does.
But we still need that number, right? Right. I think that's well understood.
I'm making a bigger point about the available inventory in Cohasset to find another place for a town hall that would meet the town hall requirements that we're trying to meet here. That is also vacant, that we don't have to deal with existing tenant issues, that has parking, that has a good location that a lot of residents seem to want in the village. So a part of my pitch is that I realize we're talking a lot about the affordable housing, which is good. I just don't want to lose sight of the town hall aspect, which is really driving this decision in the first instance, to try to find an affordable solution on that front.
But Jean, the affordable housing piece is what makes this purchase possible. And our focus is on a whole new way of effecting a capital building for the town. And I do feel that these unanswered questions on affordable housing are important and serious. That brings me to the next point I have on my list, and that is the Affordable Housing Trust and the Affordable Housing Steering Committee seem to be not involved in these discussions. I think not because they would want to, but we haven't heard from them. I was sent a link to their most recent meeting, and I found it eye-opening that they had not been involved or engaged by the select board up to that point. So my question then is, are you now as a select board engaged with the Affordable Housing Trust? And what are their concerns? They seem to have quite a few concerns about their role and how they might be tasked or might be asked to take on a role that they may not be able to undertake.
So Mike, I want to keep this short because I don't want to keep opening rabbit holes because I know you got a big agenda, but I'll say to you what I said to CPC. We did talk with the Affordable Housing Trust in August and invited them to participate. Mr. Senior did, Michelle Leary did. They're both on the call. I emailed Mr. Gomer. I did not get a response. I know that they were concerned that property management is not in their wheelhouse. I take that point. I know they haven't done that in the past. It was a good point. So we went off and started finding property managers that did do affordable housing. And we also, as we flagged in our public forum, went to CPC to try to defray the cost through the existing CPC funds.
Now, I'm
Mr.
referring to a
Kearse-
meeting. I'm sorry, go ahead, Gina.
Mr. Kearse was helping us, including at the town hall forum. We followed up on his advice and we continue to engage with him. And then I realized that the Affordable Housing Trust had questions. I reached out to them. I invited them to provide the select board with questions. I did not receive anything in response. I went to that same Affordable Housing Trust meeting that you went to. And that's when I first learned of their questions. I've reached out to them again and said, hey, why don't you come to the select board and we can all talk about this openly and work together. And so that's where we are. And that's what we're going to continue to do. But I do want everyone to be fully aware of how we got here. And we'll continue to engage with them, but that's where we are. And I don't think it's unreasonable for the Affordable Housing Trust to, say, hey, we have a different focus. We're not property managers, because that's not necessarily what they are. And so I do think that that was a fair initial response, but that's where we are. And that's what happened.
Well, there's more than just Steve Gomer on that board. And in viewing the YouTube video, I was impressed with Rob Henry, Rob Jeffers, two names that I happen to note in my notes here, who had very good comments to make about this. There's also, I think she might be an attorney, Karis North. I wasn't sure of her role, but she had an awful lot of good observations on this whole scenario that the Affordable Housing Trust at least seems to want to engage and become involved. So all this to say that at this point, I feel that we're missing a major player, a stakeholder in this question on town hall, given the necessity for affordable housing to enable the use of the rest of the building for a municipal operation. Excuse me. Excuse me.
Yeah, I don't see any other hands up. Let me just quickly take inventory of the information people have articulated would be helpful. And let's just make sure at least, no matter what happens next, in a moment, we get a list of what we think would be helpful. So the suggestion that someone meet with Michael Putziger. There's a suggestion, which I think is in motion already, that there be collaboration with the Affordable Housing Trust. There's a follow-up item with regards to the rents mechanism, just to understand how rents escalate over time. There's a question with regards to the rents as for affordable housing as compared to market, and how we believe that might evolve over time. I think there's also a question with regards to the rents. If we go to, an AMI other than 80, how much higher could they, could they possibly be? And then I think there's a question with regards to the surplus revenue going into this fund, whether or not that just disappears into the general fund at the end of each year. And also, at some point in time when the select board may choose to no longer put it into that Chapter 40 fund, does that have the potential to go literally anywhere, including into operating budgets, which I think, we'd like to see, at least I would like to see some more directed spending, let's put it that way, in terms of the intent around where those funds would go, hopefully towards other buildings. We're back to the taxpayers that bought this one that's generating the cash, as opposed to using a debt exclusion to fund an operating budget in the future, which is, a possibility if nobody actually takes a position on this. So that's my list. Michelle, Chris, Jean, is that the list that you guys have? And capital budget, did I miss anything?
Yes, I have some additional concerns I'd like to raise.
Okay.
I had a
Paul Grady has his hand up, Brian.
Okay, Paul, go ahead.
It's been a very interesting meeting. I just want to put something out there. We're discussing monies that if we passed to 26 million for town hall would never exist. And we're spending an awful lot of time discussing that. Now, these are possible revenue generators. And I think all the questions are valid, but we're splitting hairs with something that would not exist. I want to repeat that. If we passed a $26 million town hall, we'd be talking about depreciation. Where are we going to find the funds to fix it? Where are we going to find the funds to plow the driveways? But instead, we're talking about a building for $10 million that has the potential to be a revenue generator. So I'm just going to express a little bit of surprise at the detail that we're going into when the alternatives were so much more different. And if this doesn't go, then where do we start from there? And I'd ask Mr. Dick that question. You have a lot of questions, Mr. Dick, with all due respect. Are there any other solutions to what this board came up with, working with the town and with these committees?
Do you want me to answer that question?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I don't want it to get back and forth. I mean, our job here is to ask numbers. That's literally what this committee's
Take a
for.
question.
I know, but I do think
No,
that the capital budget can discuss these things without
I'm
kind
not
of
what
being
we
challenged
do.
on this kind of stuff.
That's what we do.
I've
Paul.
got issues with a lot of the things you just mentioned as well, but I don't think this is the time or the place for it. Let's stay in
No.
question mode. And
Okay, let me make a suggestion. I mean, Michael, unless you're uncomfortable, in which case we'll defer it. I mean, if you had a solution, it's certainly intriguing. If you're not comfortable going there, I totally respect what Corey just said as well.
Well, I feel I've been boxed or put into a corner. I'm
No,
not
you
a
don't need to
select board
answer.
member. I have not been elected by this town. I've been appointed by the select board to partner with my colleagues on capital budget to split hairs and to ask all the hard questions on behalf of the taxpayers. So in terms of my solutions, I don't know, Paul. I don't know if this is a good spend for the town yet. I would like it to be so, but at this point, I feel that there are so many areas of gray that there is an elevated element of risk to the town that has not been quantified or identified in a push to get this building done. I have additional questions yet on the debt exclusion, but I just want to go on record here to say I have several questions about the debt exclusion and the town manager's efforts to get that debt exclusion to the lowest possible number. So I will leave it there. Paul has his hand up and Ralph does too.
Okay, Paul? You're on mute, Paul. Paul, you're on mute.
Did I unmute? I apologize.
Yeah,
We've got you now.
we can hear you.
I'm awfully sorry about that. And Mr. Dick, those were posed with all due respect. And I'm not saying that. I'm saying that we're working on solutions, but we are discussing possibilities that would not have existed if we passed, and we'd have a higher debt exclusion with no way out. At least we're working on alternatives to try to bring it down. And the questions are appreciated. Don't ever get me wrong, please. And it's just that we're looking at all alternatives, and it's nice to have some alternatives put up. But I think, in light of what we did not pass last year compared to what we're trying to put through this year at a lower amount, which has the possibility of bringing in a net positive for the town and a net gain. That's all I want. Yes.
I hear you. I do.
Thanks, Paul. Ralph, you've got your hand up. You're on mute, Ralph.
Is it true that irrespective of whether the town does or doesn't buy it, this will have 4 affordable housing units irrespective of whether we buy it or don't buy it? Is that correct?
Yeah, it's in the special permit.
Okay.
And so it's the special permit states 4 of them are 40B and they're all rentals, therefore all 14 count. That's in the special permit.
Okay,
for the building.
all right, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, Michael, you had some questions with regards to the debt exclusion. Why don't we touch on those just so all of our questions are out in the air?
Okay. First and foremost, in the debt exclusion, the taxpayer is promised that the debt is will end after a fixed period, 20 or 30 years. In discussions with our town finance director, I heard very clearly that Massachusetts towns typically add projects as a debt exclusion rolls off. So in my mind, a debt exclusion is basically a permanent tax increase, at least in reality. You can say technically, no, it's not. It ends, but the town picks it up again. So is it possible to write a debt exclusion that says this will be retired in year X and will not be renewed or will not be taken up for another project, and promise the town that yes, this will be a finite tax increase that will end? That's one comment I'd like to make. I'd like to know if the town manager has done everything that his office can do to find money within the budget that is within our tax levy to make sacrifices or make trade-offs to find funds to apply to this project and so reduce the overall debt. And what new additional revenues should the town pursue to help reduce the amount borrowed? And Gene, way back when we first started on future financial planning, you had some thoughts on additional revenues, areas that had not really been explored. And I think that's an important aspect of this situation, the scenario that we're now in right now for this town. We need to find more revenue. And then finally, we know that the condos are about to go online and that there will be revenues from those condos, not to mention the other growth that goes on in this town. So how has new growth been used to reduce the amount that we plan to borrow?
It's a lot there, Mike.
Well, while people organize their thoughts, I'm just going to share a comment. Technically, a debt exclusion goes away. My personal opinion is, and this is just my opinion, okay, is that when the debt exclusion, when the excluded debt actually matures, you know, the building is 30 years into its life cycle, you have to replace all the major systems, and they, you know, at the future inflated cost of doing that, it oftentimes exceeds the cost of the building in the first place. And so, yeah, there's really no such thing as a debt exclusion that goes away. At least in terms of typical municipal buildings, you know, this one might be a little different in the sense that it actually has a revenue source and a profit surplus associated with it, which I've never seen a public building have before. But generally speaking, I get very frustrated when people say, oh, this debt exclusion is going to go away, because that would only happen if whatever you bought or built with the original debt exclusion also went away. And that's not true. The assets remain. and they have massive capital needs, that roughly coincide with the maturity of the original debt exclusion. So to me, once you move something out of budget, it's out of budget forever, and just continues to repeat itself. It's just a personal opinion. I think it's very, very dangerous to set an expectation that a debt exclusion is going to go away.
And that should be part of the transparency that the select board should be taking on for the town. And let them
I
know.
would certainly encourage people not to make representations that debt exclusions go away.
Right.
They certainly mature, but the obligation does not.
Well, the obligation to maintain our buildings for our residents does not go away.
Right.
No, it doesn't.
I honestly, I'll just another aside. I wasn't here at the time, but I think that promise was made with regards to some of the past debt exclusions, and I
Yes.
think it sets an unrealistic expectation that people actually expect that to go away.
That's true.
So,
That's true.
I think to just answer it directly, I'm not going to promise anything. I don't think it's realistic, and I'm not going to bind someone 30 years from now. I don't think I can, and I don't think it
No.
makes sense. I don't think so. One of the reasons we're in this place right now, in my opinion, is because we haven't passed a debt exclusion in 20 years. And so we have a whole bunch of infrastructure costs all hitting. If we had laddered or staggered them, we might be in a different place. So that's the first issue. On the second issue, in terms of reducing this debt exclusion, that's what we've tried to do through CPC funding. I realize there's back and forth on that, including whether this is the best use of CPC funding. Many people, I think, might disagree and say, hey, let's hold this for another project or for a future project that might come along. The select board has pushed hard to get the CPC funding to defray the debt exclusion here, because that's what it will effectively do. We've been working hard to also, productively manage the building through this affordable rent. Not going to go into that. We've just beaten that dead horse, or maybe not even dead yet. But so there's that. In terms of the operating budget and new growth, I saw Mr. Senior weigh in briefly, but what I will say, just based on my long-term financial planning hat, and Brian, feel free to jump in, is that we do have escalating costs on the operating side, including as a result of union negotiations, as a result of healthcare and insurance costs. We have had escalating costs over the last 10 years, in part because we have 10% more people, if you look from our census of 2010 to 2020. And that's just required us to provide more services, including, let's say, fire and police. And so a part of it is, yes, we're trying to manage on the operating side. And a part of what the long-term finance committee has done is recommend, including to the town and the schools, to manage our operating expenses such that we're not going to be seeking an override in the near future because of these tax increases we're asking the town for all these infrastructure costs. But, new growth is not a huge amount. Just to be clear, it's, vacillates between 400,000 to 600,000, which, even if we used all the new growth, is not sufficient to meet the debt burden for 1 year of One Pleasant Street, which is 800,000. So it's not a feasible way to build buildings.
Brian, can we do a time check? Because we're stuck on thing one.
We're well
and
over, which is not
I
surprising.
don't have the energy for our meeting tonight. My fault.
Yeah. Are there any other questions that we want to, or follow-up items that we want to leave with town management and the administration? And Paul, I see your hand up. We're going to come in a second.
One question I had, I know it's been brought up in other meetings, maybe, is what kind of role the Cohasset Housing Authority would have. We've talked about the Affordable Housing Trust and that they don't manage properties and so on, and that makes sense. But I don't know that I've heard what kind of engagement we've had with the Housing Authority and what assistance they can provide. So I guess that's still a question for me.
Okay. I'm going to go Paul and then Ralph.
If you're speaking to me, Brian, I didn't have my hand. I apologize if I.
Oh, okay. You just got your hand up in perpetuity, which is okay. I do that all the time. Ralph.
Yeah, the lingering question for me has been always, what is the total cost of not only buying the building, but whatever you're going to do with the 1987 annex, either now or in the next few years? You have a total cost that has to be factored into this. And I want to point out that, as you may know, there is a vault in the basement of that building. You'll have to do something about that. You just can't ignore it. So what really is going to happen with the annex of the 1987 building? And quite frankly, why hasn't anyone done anything associated with the original older town hall? So all of those costs ultimately will come before the taxpayers at some point, and at least some of them ought to be accounted for now. I can't imagine saying, I'm just going to leave this annex building, the 1987 building, and we only have $10 million and that'll be it. Is not it. There's lots more. So does anyone try to calculate it, or what are we going to tell the taxpayers about that?
So Ralph, yes, we've gotten that question, and the answer right now is we are putting together a repair list, a punch list to maintain the building. We know, for example, we have roof and window needs in the historic town hall. We are prioritizing the historic town hall in terms of repairs, because I think we feel that that is the building that's most foreseeably to stand into the future. And as you'll note in the warrant, the select board has recommended putting $500,000 of free cash into the capital stabilization fund in anticipation of coming before annual town meeting to begin knocking down that punch list with respect to the existing town hall. That said, I do think that there's going to be a need for citizen input, including programming and the future of that space. We have heard a variety of great suggestions, including suggestions ranging from tear down the annex and just preserve the existing historic town hall and make it more of like a cultural public center, which I personally think is a great idea. And so that would take a different complexion on in terms of tearing that annex down and what that would cost. And we would likely look to historic and CPC money in order to do that, and maybe partner with the Cohasset Historic Society, who successfully, has worked on other buildings too. And so I think, though, that the select board does feel that it's hard to start putting significant money into something like planning to remove the annex or planning for future programming concepts unless we know One Pleasant Street is going to pass. Because if One Pleasant Street doesn't pass, we're obviously not going to tear down the annex. We're going to have to stay in the existing town hall and program it for our municipal services. So it's a little chicken and egg, but we did want to show our commitment to still moving forward with the town hall by devoting $500,000 in free cash to the capital stabilization fund, with the intent of using that for capital, but also for anticipated town hall expenses, repairs.
It's a partial answer, Gene, as you know. That's not the whole cost, and there will be, if you come back and you say, gee, we need a new roof, for example, on both the original town hall and the 1987 annex, just to keep them. You got $1 million. I mean, you really have to be forthcoming about those things. Will happen. Inevitably, they will happen, even if you decide to tear down the building. I do think there has to be something other than $500,000 set aside, or at least say what the number is. I'm not convinced that just saying we got this great deal at $10 million, but there are no other real expenses. There are really a lot of other expenses. Could be a couple of million, could be 3 million. I don't know what the number is, but it'll be significant, not insignificant. So you need to be forthcoming or transparent on this one, even though it may be hard to predict exactly what. But there to be two scenarios: you tear it down or you don't tear it down. And of course, I'm speaking as much as anything about Jackie's consideration here. She will never, ever enter a building all by herself in the basement alone as an individual woman to work on the old town records. It just isn't going to happen. I mean, you're not thinking about what the reality to people is if you don't actually think about what happens when you in fact abandon a building and then you still have a function there that you need to actually maintain. So, I mean, there are really issues here that maybe nobody thinks about, but anyhow, so.
Okay. To Corey's point, we would, we're running way over on this. What I'd like to do is poll a committee to understand that if a vote were to take place today, whether you would feel compelled to abstain based on the lack of information. And that will tell us fundamentally whether or not we should even begin to think about voting this. And I think I know some of the answers already, but let's just quickly poll, recognizing that there are people on this call that absolutely feel like they need additional information. I'll start with an easy one. Michael, you're on mute. Michael, you're on mute.
There we go. At this point, I would certainly abstain, if not vote against.
Okay. Corey?
The concept is attractive, but I don't have enough here to vote either way, so I would abstain as well.
You'd abstain. Francine?
I would abstain as well.
Okay. Susan?
Well, my perspective on it is that the affordable housing piece is a little bit of the tail wagging the dog on the decision to determine whether we need, to purchase this building. I do have a lot of open questions. In fact, the annex is a big issue of mine. We were told that was the reason we needed a new town hall in the first place, was the annex was in such bad condition. So I don't know why we're even debating maintaining the annex. So I do have other questions, but when I look at it sort of holistically, whether these affordable housing units end up being, only 4 truly affordable and the other ones escalating up in the rent scale, I like the idea of having an offset. I do believe that we need to figure out how we control those funds that come off the building, but I don't think it at this moment, with what's in front of us, stops me from voting on the project.
Okay. And I'm in a similar place. I look at this a handful of different ways. To me, the affordable housing piece appears, based on the numbers in front of me today, that it's going to generate a positive surplus, that it should at least cover the future capital costs associated with those units. So even if I put a 0 on those and assume they don't exist, then fundamentally what we're doing is buying a full market rate, town hall of 9,000 square feet at, call it $1,100 per square foot, which is a very big dollar number per square foot. But in terms of actually getting us, a functional administrative space, the total purchase price is a lot less than a lot of the alternatives that have been discussed. And I do agree so I would have the ability to vote this. I completely concur that all of the information that's been articulated as missing is stuff that needs to get resolved in the context of actually completing this project and figuring out how to manage it. And I completely concur that that there's a big number associated with Old Town Hall, and we can't just look at this in a vacuum. I mean, I think the several $1 million worth of investment to take place over at that building, whether it is an annex or not an annex, we should think seriously about, perhaps ring fencing, any surplus that comes off of this building to do it. And, beyond that, we're going to have to partner with CPC. So if there were a vote tonight, I would have the ability to do that. But I hear loud and clear that there are 3 voting members that would abstain tonight. And so my instinct is we should table this along with the questions, try to resolve this as best we can prior to town meeting, and get a vote that actually reflects the best possible light of this on this project with regards to this committee's view. That's my instinct. What do other people believe?
obviously I don't vote, as you know. I still think if I were actually just working as an individual, I would ask somebody I consider to be an expert on this whole thing about what's realistic and how do people make money who make a lot of money on affordable housing. And
So you're saying get Putziger in there to
no,
view
at
it?
at least, for heaven's sakes, somebody who's an expert at it and knows how to make money. And the question is, how do you do that, or what do you do? Do you do it with rental? Do you do it as you sell these things? What happens? So not just to be realistic. I think you want to be realistic about this thing and not necessarily. And I understand people are, and good thanks to Michelle and Jean and Chris and everybody else who's worked very hard on this thing. I just think I'd like to talk with somebody who really knows what they're talking about directly. That's all. So,
Rob, can you make that introduction?
Absolutely. Oh yeah, no question. Yeah, right.
If I could please ask you to do that, that would be helpful.
How would you like that? Would you like that in a public forum? Are you talking about something that's in a smaller group that is not invoking the open meeting law? What would you want here?
Maybe 2 bites at the apple. I mean, first give maybe, Michelle and Chris and Jean and their team first crack at the apple to maybe, learn from this guy. But, ultimately, I think there are others that would probably love to have the conversation too. And at some point we trigger a quorum.
We'll have to see whether he wants to make a public face for this. That's all. So I'll find out. Okay. Thanks.
Good question. It's kind of at his discretion.
Yeah, it's his.
I'm just thinking out loud on the fly here. So
yeah.
Okay.
Dangerous thing to do.
Sorry?
I said that's a dangerous thing to do.
Particularly in my case, I can. All right. All right. So I made a suggestion that given 3 abstentions and 2 folks that are prepared to vote, that I don't even know if that would count as an official vote. I don't think that technically comprises a quorum. It's an interesting question, but I'm not sure that 2 votes and 3 abstentions really sends the signal that's helpful to this project, even if we were to proceed. So, and that's assuming the 3 would be abstentions, recognizing they could be no's at this time. So, again, my suggestion is we continue to work on this, try to close some of these gaps, and see if we can get more people into a place where they feel comfortable voting. Is that? Do other people agree? I'll just go around. Francine.
I'm sorry, say that again.
My suggestion is, given that we've got 3 abstentions and outstanding information, that we continue to work on this and vote it when other people are comfortable actually taking a vote. You agree with that, Michael?
Agreed. I agree.
Yes, I agree.
Corey? You're shaking your head. Okay. It's not an official vote. You can shake your head. I got it. Susan?
It wasn't a motion. I could.
Okay.
Yes, I agree.
Okay, great. All right, look, it's been a very healthy discussion. Michael, I know that's what you were looking for, was a very healthy discussion. We've had that discussion. We've had the opportunity to choose whether or not to vote. The decision has been made, and let's do what we promised to do, which is move on and get done what we can get done. The next item up is the CPA portion of funding for this project. And given we're not voting the project, I'm not sure I see any logic in, even considering to vote the CPA portion of it. But is there a discussion that anyone would like to have on the CPA portion of it?
I mean, I don't really want to get into it, but of the project, of the questions I have, that's the most concerning to me, is the use of that fund for this project. Just in short, I'm not sure it's, I don't want to use the word appropriate, the best use of CPA funds in this. If we are going to bond it, it's going to be $10 million. CPA, then CPA would be bringing the debt load down for what is a municipal building. I get uncomfortable. I don't want to go into too far, but that's probably one of my biggest hangups of this project. I think I'd be a lot more comfortable with a lot of it if it was all kind of clean. And CPA then has, more time for, we just talked about 41 Highland, right? At $1.3 million goes a long way. And especially because we're not creating any units here, right? We're buying units that are in our inventory. So I've got struggles with that.
Okay, Corey, I apologize if what I'm about to say is in any way inappropriate, but I just want to encourage everyone to recognize we're capital budget. And so when it comes to CPA funding, our role is a little different. It's their turf to set their priorities. And I just want to be respectful of that. If it's not legal for them to do this, that's an issue for council. If it's a bad project, that's an issue for us. But in terms of how they set their priorities within their legal charter, I think that's a dangerous place for us as a committee to go. I apologize if that didn't come out.
No, well phrased, but
Okay.
no argument there, and I understand that we're treading on not our territory.
Yeah,
but in the
their
context
priorities
of the
are
project.
their priorities. Any other questions or comments with regards to the CPA portion before we move on?
Well, we have 4 projects on the warrant.
Well, I'm just talking about the CPA, just the CPA piece of town hall. Then we're going to move on to the other CPA stuff next.
I see. Okay.
Okay, sounds like there's nothing further on the CPA portion of town hall. Let's move on to the next CPA group of items, which are the tennis courts, the Beechwood playgrounds, and the lacrosse wall. And Chris, if you could just pull up the warrant article. Hopefully this one's straightforward. I mean, these are projects that everyone's very familiar with. Okay, so we would be talking about item number 4. We just talked about item number 3, which is the town hall portion. Now we're talking about item number 4. So just in terms of item number 3, capital budgets vote will come for town meeting. And the same is true for the prior article. Capital budgets vote will come, for town meeting. And then on item number 4, I guess I'd ask the question, just leaping right to it. Do people feel like they have the information they need to vote this? Does anyone feel like there's a piece of information that they don't have that they need to vote this? Okay, so it sounds like we're in a place where we're capable of voting this. All right, is there any discussion or comments or observations that people would like to, or questions?
Well, I'd just like to say to Corey's comment, having the affordable housing unit in there, you're basically forcing this, well, not forcing, but you're putting them in a position where they have to borrow from future receipts to do these other projects, which isn't great.
Chris?
So I was at the meeting when they voted this, and they discussed it, and they wanted to stretch the costs out over time to allow them to fund other projects they expect are coming in the next couple of years. So they did have a robust conversation, because they could have funded, leaving aside the One Pleasant Street for a second, they could have put cash into this project either way, and they chose not to. They wanted to make sure they had other money in reserve. So they have about $800 and some odd $1,000 that'll carry into the spring, but they'll have another $600,000 to $800,000 for next year anyway. So but they did have a good conversation about this, and I think I shared a spreadsheet with all of you. So using the declining the level principal payments, and I can put this up on the screen if you want me to. They're going to still have over $2 million over the next 5 years to spend, even with the debt service. And the plan would to make this a 10-year borrowing. It could go to 15, but it didn't make sense to go that long. So a 10-year borrowing, and then over that 10-year period, they'd still have at a minimum $4.7 million to allocate to other projects over the next 10 years. It's likely it's going to be higher than that. So I just wanted to share that.
Okay.
Okay, and hypothetically, if you could just pull the warrant well, if you pull the article back up, Chris, if hypothetically, I'm not suggesting this would happen, but if hypothetically town hall didn't go through for whatever reason, and that 1.2 million, as a result did not happen. So there's nothing in that article that would preclude them from spending cash on this, would there?
Well, they'd have to revote it.
Okay.
So I mean, yes, since they voted this, they'd have to revote it that night on town meeting floor to make the to change the recommendation.
Got it. Okay. Susan, are you, does that answer,
Yep.
well,
No, that clarifies, yes.
you're good. Okay. Any other questions?
A minor question from me, and that is on the Beechwood Playground renovation. And Chris Senior, maybe you can answer this question. It looks like to me that the repairs took place for 30,000. But in a meeting that I attended, it sounded like the money wasn't spent. So were those repairs done? And was the money spent?
So Michelle can answer
Yeah.
this more. Yes.
Sure.
go ahead.
So yes, the repairs were done,
Yeah,
and
it
the
looks
money
like
was
it.
spent.
Great, thank you.
Okay. If there are no further questions, I'd entertain a motion.
Can I just ask one other quick question?
Please.
It's really, Michelle, on the tennis courts with the new retaining wall, is that going to provide any area for viewing these matches, or is it just a wall?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Susan. And when we were talking about this, they do have a coach's bullpen built into this court area. And then they are talking about an additional viewing area up on Milliken Field.
Okay. And is that in the numbers, or would that be in addition to the numbers?
Nope, that's all inclusive. That's included in the number.
Okay, great, thanks.
Sure.
I'd like to move that we capital budget recommend projects 1, 2, and 4 out of the CPA funds, Article 6, the town meeting.
Actually, Chris, can you just pull that back up? I'm not sure what 1 and 2 are.
Paul Pratt. There you go.
Yes, that's not a capital item.
Oh.
2 is precariously close to being a capital item, but I believe on read of the bylaw is not a capital item because I don't believe the town actually owns the property.
Owned by a nonprofit. Cohasset Housing Authority is a nonprofit.
Wholly owned by the town of Cohasset, right?
Is it owned by the town of Cohasset?
That's my understanding. What I've read this CHA, I think it's on their site. It says it's owned by the town of Cohasset.
Okay, so it is a town asset then. Okay, so you could move it for, I mean, we haven't reviewed that item. And if it's owned by the town of Cohasset, then technically it is. Do people feel comfortable voting that, having not heard it, or do you want to just vote item 4 and ask them to come present to us on item 2?
Since we have absolutely no information on this, I would at least expect us to get some kind of document that explains the rationale and how carefully they've estimated the cost, so that we can be sure that there's a good use of the money, and it's well spent.
Okay, so we're going to defer items 2 and 3 to town meeting and suggest we vote item 4, given we've actually reviewed it. So Corey, could you kindly reconsider that new motion?
Yeah, rescind my original motion, new motion to move to recommend to town meeting Article 4 for Beechwood Playground, new sports ball, Bancroft tennis courts renovation.
Do we have a second?
Second,
Great. We'll do a roll call vote. Susan Franklin,
Susan Franklin, aye.
Michael Dick,
Michael Dick, aye.
Francine Lyons,
Francine Lyons, aye.
Corey Evans,
Corey Evans, aye.
and Brian Host, aye. And Ralph, can we get a smile or a thumbs up? All right. All right, now we're flying. Next up, police station fire annex. I think
Brian,
the
I think
major-
we should take a poll of the members here to see if we want to go past 8 o'clock, and if so, how far? This is a lot going on in this one too.
Yeah, this one's tricky. My sense is the two that follow, maybe less so. But that's so I'm okay, but to your point, Michael, let's hear from others. Nobody's leaping to speak. All right, I'm gonna put someone on the hot seat. Here it comes. Susan.
I'm okay probably for 8:30 rather than 8.
Okay. Francine.
Me too. Me too. 8:30. I can go. Yep.
Okay. Corey.
8:30, but kind of hard stop at that point. I
Okay.
gotta take care
Michael?
of stuff.
8:30 with a hard stop, yes.
Okay, let's do it. All right, let's do police and fire. So I think this, at least my perception, is that on this one, the major outstanding item was just getting some comfort that the number's real. And you know, there are different ways to get there, but I'd like to start with that. Michelle, I'd turn it over to you just to share with anything that you've got that gives us comfort that, you know, there's been work done here and there's real math being done that gets us to that number.
Sure. So what I can say about this project is we are working with Castle and Booz. They're a designer of several public safety buildings around. We did hire them to do the initial study of the building to make sure that the location worked and that the building was feasible. With the funds allocated, what they've done for us is they've done a structural survey to make sure the building's structurally sound. And they've done the programming. They've sat with both the police chief and the fire chiefs and worked through programming to see if the size allocated for the building was sufficient, which it is. I think a lot of the questions were what type of additions will need to be made to the building. And Brian, I think we spoke of it maybe last week or the week before, and the Sally Port, yes, is an addition to the building. That will not fit within the 14,000 square feet. But the Sally Port is simply just a brick building attached to the side of the existing building. The other addition to the building would be the carport, if you will, or the other bay that will house the engine and ambulance, or just ambulance. They've gone through several programming variations. The select board indicated early on that the purchase of the building would be separate from the actual renovations, meaning, you know, we're going to purchase the building at a cost of $2.4 million. And the budget to renovate the building is not to exceed $8 million. And so that would make the entire project 10.4. So instead of what we've done in the past, which is allowing the designers to design and then being surprised with the cost at the end, this time we said, you know, there are guardrails here. You can design up to $8 million, including contingencies and everything else, but that's it. So what does that get us? And what we've been told is we get a police building, and we'll get a bay for fire. But they have indicated this is no frills. This is not going to be the envy of the South Shore. It's simply going to be a public safety building on 3A, which is what the police and fire have asked for.
Okay, and have they given you sort of any sort of line item estimate build up to, you know, where the chunks of money are going to go, and that it, how it adds up, and, you know, what's the contingency on this?
Sure. So as far as construction, we're talking about a $6 million construction fee. The $2 million would be additional contingencies. As far as line items, the largest expenses of this building would be, of course, the detention area. Is a large portion. Shoring up the building for it to be a public safety facility, because right now it's built to an office building standard, and the standards are different for public safety. It does need an elevator in the building to make it ADA accessible. Currently, there's no elevator in the building, and just the outbuildings. So that's where your bulk of your money is going to go to. We did go through, this morning I went through with Chief Quigley, the programming, and of course they have things in there that the chief says it's not necessary. They have a large fitness center in there. And as the chief indicated, yes, is it nice to have? Absolutely. Can they use the one at the high school? Sure they can. So there was a lot of square footage that could be stripped out of the original proposal that was given to us by Castle Booze. So now we have to go back to them and refine it further. So the next phase of this project would be to put some pricing towards the programming.
Okay, and in terms of site work, is there any major site work that needs to take place?
The only major site work would really depend on, I guess, the desire to place the Sally port out of sight or the fire bay in the back. So currently right now, the back would need to be cleared if in fact you wanted to push everything towards the back of the building. But there is room currently on either side of the building to just attach. They had an illustration for us. It almost looked a little bit like Minecraft. Because they just kind of attached the bay to one side and the Sally port to the other. There it is. But if we decided to clear, you can see right behind the building is where you would clear.
Okay, and that road to the left of the building exists currently?
It does.
It goes up and wraps around right behind the building?
It does. So what really would be a great idea is just to clear right beyond the back of the building, so you could have a total driveway that goes all the way around the building in its entirety.
Okay, and the thought is you might put you could possibly put the Sally port in the back.
Correct.
Okay. Turn it over to the committee. Who's got questions on this? Corey?
Oh,
Mike,
Mike, you're muted.
Michael, you're on mute. Go ahead.
Somebody else tell me I'm on mute and I'll unmute. 62 Elm Street is going to require some build out as well, I understand. Is that still the case? And what money has been allocated for that purpose, and how much will it need? And that would be to adapt the 62 Elm for the fire department's various needs.
Absolutely. So the next phase of the project is to do a complete study that would include that building. As of right now, one of the goals is just to bring everything from the basement upstairs when the police move out, so they can extend into the police area. They'll no longer need the detention area, so that piece can come down. So there are modifications that can be done in the short term that don't cost a lot of money. As far as the amount of money allocated, I can't give you that exact figure, but the conversations with the designer was, we have to also include upgrades to the fire station at 62 Elm Street when the police move out. So they are very much aware of that, and that is phase 2 of the study.
And is there a schedule for phase 2?
So it's going to happen at the same time as they put the pricing with 135 King Street.
Okay, so that's in our 10.4 million. That 62 Elm will be upgraded and changed from police activity to fire department need.
The answer to that, Mike, is that it's not included in this debt issuance because
No, it's not,
you can't mix the buildings together. So we're gonna have to figure out what that amount is and perhaps just fund it separately. If it's a modest enough number, we could use free cash. But we don't know what that is. Again, it could be that some of the repairs, as Michelle said, are very simple. If any of them are a little more complicated, we'll have to figure that out. But you can't mix two buildings into one ask for an debt exclusion. At least that's what we're told.
All right, so we might expect something in annual town meeting in 2024 for the fire department?
Or the fall of 24, depending on how long it takes to get the study done.
And the fire chief is okay with that?
Well, we want to get the answers, right? So, I mean, he's already meeting with the designers and the consultants. So, I mean, yeah.
So it's still up in the air.
Well, it's up in the air in the sense that we don't have details, right? So we know what we think's going to go there, and I don't want to get too far ahead, as Michelle reel me back if I'm going too far. The decontamination space and stuff like that would be at 62 Elm, right?
Right.
And that would be pulling it. So it may be that it's simpler to do some of that than we think. I just don't know. I don't know that has to be does that have to be an air controlled, vented area? I don't know. Is it as something as if some of it just getting a room upstairs where you can move the washers and dryers and other cleaning devices that they have for the equipment, right? Because right now that's all in the basement, and that's obviously a lot easier. And they might be able to retrofit part of a bay too, if again, that's what the designers are going to be looking at as part of the conversation, as Michelle just said.
Right. So I think, Chris, one of the positive points that the designers made was, the police station does already have toilet rooms and shower rooms, so the plumbing is already in place, which makes it a lot easier, and you're not paying for that entire retrofit of adding all new plumbing to the site. So they did give some indications of how they could make the money work better for us, but we do have to wait for that study.
So would you be comfortable in giving us a rough estimate of the amount of money that might be needed to retrofit and upgrade 62 Elm? Is it in the millions, like 1, 2, 3 million? Would it be far less than that?
I would have I wouldn't even venture to guess what it would cost.
Okay.
I don't think it's in the several millions.
Right. I just fear that this is going to be a gotcha once we move on from this town meeting. So I just want to keep a close eye on making sure that Chief Dockeray gets what he needs and that the town has the funds to do it. And then one other question I have on the Emergency Operations Center. I haven't seen anything further about it moving from Deer Hill School to 135 King. What's the latest on that for the EOC?
Well, the plan is to incorporate it into 135 King. I mean, as Glenn, I think, mentioned a couple of times, we're talking about a couple of offices and really that kind of common space where, have you been in the basement, Mike, at
Yes.
Deer Hill? So it's having that kind of common space area, some storage, which would be in the building anyway, and then some offices that could be used. So, that's kind of be, and again, that room, when it's not being used for emergency management purposes, will be used for training and other things too. So it's a multi-purpose room. Right now, the Emergency Management Center is used by rec during the summer, but it's really not used, and it's used sometimes for training already. So it'll be a backup center. That's what the plan would be. The Deer Hill site would be backup, but the that space would be part of, like, it's part of the plans for the police, aspect.
But there'll be dedicated space for an emergency management operation to go on during a blizzard or.
You wouldn't be doing training right during that. So the room that would be otherwise used for that kind of stuff would just be converted. That's my vision of that, is that you have a multi-purpose space. We don't have a bunk. It's not like Framingham, right, where there's literally a bunker where the government can go down into, right? This will be a space that when it's not being used for an emergency, you'll be using for training and other purposes.
And
so the
that's
big common space.
Deer Hill or 135?
No, it's at 135 King.
Okay, that's really what I was wondering.
Oh, yeah. The goal is to move all of that for emergency purposes to 135 King, and leaving Deer Hill as a backup in case for whatever reason we absolutely had to have it. So we wouldn't get rid of that space, and we could probably still store some stuff down there, because that's what's down there mostly anyway, right? It's historically been used for storage. You can't before EOC went down.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
I'm said it before. I'm very in support of this overall concept. I'm getting, and I don't want to be uncomfortable. I want to fully embrace this, but I do feel like I'm voting on, and I won't use Michelle's words against her, but basically like a 3D image of a concept. That's a $10 million spend. And that's usually not how this goes. We usually have plans and line items, and we can delve into them. I mean, you did that for months with the town hall project. And this is just, there's none of that. So that's kind of my only hang up here. There's not enough information here to know what to ask. I don't really know if that's a problem. Is that a feature or a bug? I'm vacillating on it.
No question, this one's, different than a typical, greenfield build construction project where we have all the studies and all the analysis in advance.
But at the very least, a line item breakdown of what the spend is going to be. And Corey has asked for this in the past, very recently, last couple of meetings. So I would want to see that as well, just for our due diligence, and to say, okay, yes, we reviewed this.
If I could just throw back on this for just a second. So one of the criticisms of the prior project that for town hall was that it was designed without cost, right? That was that it was, right. So in this case, the select board has said, here are guardrails. Here are the financial guardrails. You got $10 million. So design it to that. And that's what's happening. So we're very, very early in that process. We have some ideas. That said, we have a cap. So we're working within that cap. Now, trying to get everything we can into that cap, right? The goal is to get everything in, get it value engineered. Michelle and Chief Quigley was sitting down just this afternoon, going through the program again to try to scrub down and see what's really needed and what isn't. We're going to do the same thing with fire. And right now we have, again, Michelle, what was the number? We had like 20,000 we were able to pull out of some money we had left over from ARPA to fund this first phase. It doesn't get you very far with design, right? So to get to what you're looking to get to, that level of detail requires design and concepts and schematics, and we don't have that, and we're not going to have that until we spend more money. Again, within the guardrails that the select board said. So this is kind of the flip of the past projects. So I understand what you're looking for, and those things will be created as the process goes, with an understanding that the select board set these financial boundaries around the project. It's like you got there's this much money, and then we're going to build to it. And again, if it comes out at the end for bidding or whatever, or the cost estimation that comes through, that it may cost a little more here, a little more there, the question will be, well, does the town want to spend more money on that extra piece or not? So there'll be full price transparency. Now the other
Chris, can I don't want to jump off that. I just want to say, I mean, like, I'm not saying they're mutually exclusive, right? Setting a budget and then designing that budget is good, but why is it 10? Why not 9? Why not 9.5?
Exactly.
Why not 7.5? Why not 10.5? Why not 11? I mean, so I understand setting a level, but there's not even enough information here to even figure out what that level's for outside of it's a round number, right? So anything that says, yeah, it's 10 because it's 10 or it's 9 because it's 9, that helps us, you know, can we do anything like that to give us, you know, some comfort? Because the 10 feels arbitrary. And I think we just, in normal process, need more than that.
I agree.
Do we have a breakdown of the 6, recognizing that, you know, two of this is contingency and, you know, 2.5 or 2.4 is building? Do we actually have a breakdown of the 6 and where that's going?
That's what we're going through the program for now, right? Is to say, so as again, Michelle can jump in if I'm misunderstanding, because I was not involved as deeply involved as she has been in some of the initial conversations. So the question was, okay, what's the fence post? What can we work with it again? And we've already shared. Hingham is $50 million. That's what they're spending. Hingham's spending $50 million on their police and fire headquarters, right? And Situate spent 16. Is that, if I remember that number correctly, right? 6 years ago. So the conversation was, okay, Booz and Castle. Can we have a firm that we can work with? We found Booz and Castle. Am I saying that right? Or is it Castle Booz? I think it's Castle Booz. And the question is, what can we do, and what are the with a price point, right? What is it really going to cost to get at least what we need to do with, you know, jails and Sallyport and a retrofitted building, and that's the number we're working with. So this is not. So I mean, again, I don't have any more to offer you at this point than that.
Okay. So let me ask you a question. What would we or could we have, you know, 3 weeks from now, in terms of information that could, you know, provide further clarity that the $6 million is a real number in terms of the estimated cost of the reno?
So I think the best we can do within the next 3 weeks is probably just go through the programming and ask them to assign values. And they're just going to be really costs of opinion at that point, to each section of the build out for both police and fire. I think that's as close as we're going to get to some numbers. I don't know how accurate they'll be, but I mean, we can certainly ask them to provide something like that. Whether they'll be comfortable or not doing it, I can't answer that, because I know they've been resistant thus far, because they don't like to put their name with numbers that end up bidding out much higher. So it's a bit challenging, but we can certainly push back and ask them, if not give us line item costs, tell us where a bulk of the costs are. Is it the detention block? Is it the Sallyport? Like where are we spending most of our money?
Right. But the bottom line is they're going to be incredibly uncomfortable that they may bid out substantially higher, which is what, you know, we experienced with Town Hall, for example. Okay, one of the things that's spinning through my head, and you know, we kind of created, maybe even I personally created this monster. You know, originally this started as a $2.4 million acquisition of a building, and I know there was a point in time where I said, look, you know, we might want to tell people what they're really signing up for, because it's not just the acquisition, it's the renovation before you have something that's actually workable, right? So we need to let people know what the total cost of the project is going to be. So now that's what we're trying to do. I guess what I'm struggling in this, I'm going to think out loud here because I don't have a solution, but I'm toying with an idea is, and people may or may not even be comfortable with this, is, you know, is there a way to vote the acquisition plus some monies to study this, you know, plus, you know, the total excluded debt numbers, so that people are comfortable, that people are buying into whatever it is, a $10.4 million project, but somehow set the appropriation for the renovation activity itself subject to a vote of all the committees and frankly the taxpayers at Springtown meeting after all that work's done and after the building's acquired.
Or have to do 2 votes, and that gets messy.
it does get messy. I'm just trying to figure out that there's a way to break this chicken and an egg circle that we're clearly in, you know, or do we just have to get our heads around the chaos of, you know, the unknown here? I mean, I'm just thinking out loud as to whether or not there's a structural way to, you know, to get people to comfort before, you know, the $8 million goes out the door.
Yeah, we have two
Ralph has
very,
his hand up in case he's got some
oh,
clarity.
I'm sorry, Ralph.
Sorry, Mike. I just Ralph.
Sorry, Ralph, go ahead.
Okay, well, a couple of questions. One is, if we're going to have a fire station, including an ambulance and a truck, and this question has come up before, isn't it true that we will have to have 4 people to man that, because we typically send out 2 people with an ambulance and 2 people with a fire truck with the ambulance in order to handle almost any emergency? Isn't that a cost that ought to be included, or at least exposed as to an additional cost, which is personnel? Okay.
Ralph, I think you missed that meeting. We did talk about that. I think Mike brought that up quite a bit.
Okay.
And yeah, I think it was expressed to us that there's no anticipated addition of staff. And I think the point was because we're actually missing 2 people that were budgeted for. So it wouldn't create any new positions. That's was summary of my discussion. Is that what you remember, Mike?
That's correct. That's
Okay.
my understanding.
Am I right in thinking we have 24 people now from the fire department? And now
We have 24 budgeted positions, Ralph. We still only have 22, but we haven't been able to get to 24. We can keep
Okay.
trying.
So you're not adding to what has already been budgeted in the past.
Chief Dockeray has said that at this point, he has no intention of asking for additional staff.
Okay. And then an observation. I walked around the building. This is 135 King Street. I walked around the building in and around back. If you haven't done it, you'd be surprised, because you could walk out on the 2nd floor directly onto the land that abuts the building. In other words, the entire 1st floor is entirely up against the back of a long, high ledge. Okay, I don't know whether it's even realistic to excavate in back there. You would excavate at least 10 feet, maybe 12 or more, maybe for a foundation even more. So one of the major questions is anyone really seriously considering trying to excavate the back of that building, given the fact that it is already so high, it is complete, a 2nd floor height, and there's nothing else back there other than an additional higher ledge behind it. It seems like an extraordinary thought to think you're going to dig that out for a modest amount of money. I can't even imagine it, but maybe you've looked, Michelle, or somebody else, but I certainly think that is not realistic to do. So you're stuck with something, I think, on the level of the 1st floor, not the 2nd floor. So
Ralph, I did ask that question. I said, as it pertains to site work, you know, is the juice worth the squeeze there? And they said, believe it or not, but that wouldn't be a significant cost to clear that area. And to add to that, the current owners of the building, from what I understand, have had plans to clear that in the past. So we're trying to get at those costs so I can share them with you. Because they do have a proposal to clear the back because they wanted to make that usable area. So.
Okay, so that's the question. But if you walk it, you'd be surprised that is actually realistic to do. But anyway, let me give you another observation, which I think is not relevant to the question at all, but is relevant to what I feel is sort of the essence of what the police department is. And I'll take you back to a place where most of you weren't around, but nevertheless that I was. We had a guy come in whose name was Jim Hussey as the police chief. He originally worked as, I guess, the head of police actually in Boston, and he stayed with us for 2 or 3 years. And he transformed the department into a department that was generally enforcement oriented, maybe not as professional as it ought to be, into a department that was actually both providing service and enforcement. And he made a personal effort himself to be seen on the streets. He would actually jog around the block with a few of his men or some of his guys on a regular basis. So you got to know people from the police department. And so it was both service and it was also enforcement is what they were providing. Over a period of time, and one of the aspects of that was to make the police cars more user-friendly, better colors, didn't darken the windows, didn't do any of that, took all that away. But all of that has begun to change. And I see in all of this a profound change in how we will view the police department in this town. One which used to be considered service and relatively friendly, where you knew the people, and enforcement was done as necessary, and to basically a remote operation off of 3A, 135 King Street, where you won't see or know anyone, and enforcement becomes the sole major function of the department. And that's not to say they won't do a good job and it won't be professional and all of that, and that they won't be the first responders. We know all of that, but it will be different. And so you have to be aware that although I'm not negative on the building, I think you have to be aware this profoundly changing how we will view the police going forward. And I know it may be the only real option for us, but it is not necessarily. We're losing our small town gradually, inexorably, as we make these kinds of decisions, which are really not necessarily ideal by any manner of means. Anyway, just some thoughts.
Ralph, I never really considered that. I just saw Chief Quigley pop up, and I see the character of our force really kind of top down with leadership, choosing the right chief. And, I see guys at coffee all the time. I see guys at the pool. I don't really see guys ever at the station. I don't go down there. But I've never really had a concern about where headquarters was, because I always saw the guys kind of out and about, right? So I never even considered that. I have to kind of chew on that a little bit more, because I think you've got something there about kind of where it is. But I think that's where we lean on the culture of the town, the culture of the chief, the culture of all of us, to be sure that the police force reflects the values that we have as a town, right? I think that's really the guiding post more so than the structure, for me at least. I do. So the other thing, I'm checking myself here. Obviously I've heard it before. You don't want to let the enemy be, the perfect be the enemy of the good. Chief talked about this during the meeting, how this is important. This gets him what he wants. I don't want this particular thing to go to town meeting with uncertainty. I would love to have more stuff here, but if we're going to ask the question about before, I would be comfortable voting it tonight, if that's what my committee members felt as well. Just putting that out there.
Unless there's significant additional deliberation, new information that we need to discuss, I'd like to ask the question that Corey just, already answered individually of the other members. Certainly we all acknowledge we'd love more information on this. Realistically, we're not going to have a lot more 3 weeks from now. We've heard Michelle say that any numbers we get are still subject to bid overage. So even if we get numbers, it's not necessarily going to create anything other than perhaps a false sense of confidence. There's risk around on this one in terms of where the costs actually going to land. And I think, no matter how this is, how people vote, whether it's now or later, in support or against, I think we're going to need to be clear on town hall floor or town meeting floor that, there's risk around this number. It's just the nature of this beast. But all those things said, I just want to poll people as to, whether or not they're able to vote tonight, recognizing those imperfections, or whether they feel compelled to either abstain or to vote no, just based on the fact that we don't have everything we'd like.
Brian, Chief Quigley has got his hand up. I'd love to hear from him.
Sure, Bill.
Hey, Brian. Hi, committee. Thank you. And I appreciate what Ralph was saying. I'm not going jogging now. Jim Hussey's been gone for, it's hard to believe, but he started 20 years ago. Now, the department has completely changed, and we're just in a different place. And one of the things I want this committee to go into wide-eyed, eyes wide open is, well, earlier, one of the things Mike Dick talked about during the town hall talk was quantified risk. We're at a point where we have quantified risk. We're running a detention center, a cell block that is non-compliant. We've been written up every year for the past at least 4 years. And, the inspectors come in, they're actually due this month. So it's going to be interesting what they say this time, because there's further degradation of the cell block. But we get written up by the state. They notify me in writing. They notify the Board of Health in writing, and they notify the Select Board. If someone hurts themselves in our cell block, that's quantified risk. There's going to be a major federal lawsuit. I've been on record saying that this is not working. The cell block is not non-compliant. We've been warned again. And I say this as the guy that's, my name will be at the top of the federal lawsuit. So I'll be the one that gets sued along with the town if someone hurts themselves. And just for reference, this isn't hyperbole. We had an overdose in the cell block over the summer, towards the end of the summer. And luckily, one of the officers caught it. The person came in with some stuff on board and then went out in the cell. He had to be transported to South Shore Hospital and took a substantial amount of Narcan to bring him back. But, it was just, we lucked out that this person was, that we noticed him. The cameras are not sufficient. The monitoring system in the cell block is not sufficient. The bars and plexiglass are not sufficient. The space is not sufficient. There's no running water in the cells. So I just want to go on the record and just make sure everybody knows where we're coming from with this. Thank you.
Thanks, Chief. So with that additional color, we'll continue where Corey left off. I'm going to poll people, so you're each going to be in the hot seat at the moment. I just want to understand if people are in a position where they could vote this or are prepared to vote this, or would feel the need to either abstain or vote no just on the basis of lack of information. When I start with you, Francine.
Can I just clarify real quick? I'm looking at the draft. I think the most current draft of the warrant, maybe there's only one, but there's no dollar amount listed here that we're approving, right? But I know there's other material that talks about the purchase price and up to the $8 million to renovate and all, but there's no price here that we're approving or dollar amount we're approving, and then it still has to go in front of the voters, right? So we're just saying, yes, you can proceed and present this to the voters on the ballot. Is that right? Am I misunderstanding that?
This is our recommendation. It's going, Francie, it's going to the voters. Because the select board put it up. This is our line item. Do we recommend, the capital budget committee votes recommend or to not recommend?
Yeah, we can certainly vote to recommend it at a price, even though that's not what's written in the warrant. And then that creates, a demand that the town manager motion reflect the price that's reflected tonight, right?
I'm not sure I'm suggesting that. I just want to make sure I'm clear based on the discussion versus what's in the warrant, how it's written in the warrant.
Yeah.
Francine, I have the answer for you on that.
Yeah,
because I've had similar questions, including the way the election ballot is written without a price for the bond in it.
Yeah.
And that's how you're required to do it by statute.
Okay.
And so that's why we put the informational summary, and we'll have an informational summary that identifies the $10.4 million amount.
Yeah.
Okay.
As long as we're all here for future reference, this is, this question, which is, thank you, Francine, for raising it, is exactly why we should be voting warrants with motions in hand. And I'm going to keep repeating this until I'm blue in the face. That is the right way to do this. And I'm going to keep asking that we do that in the future. There's no reason that the motion should come, you know, a day or two before town meeting.
So having said that, I mean, I would be willing to vote tonight. Yes.
Okay. Michael?
I'm not willing to vote tonight, in that I want to be sure that if we're asking for a debt exclusion, that the amount for the debt exclusion is at the lowest possible amount. And that we have two variables in front of us. One is the contingency and where that came from. And more importantly, the amount of money necessary for the renovation. Having said that, I fully support this initiative. I just want to make sure that we've got the right number on it, and that we've been really good about getting that number to the lowest possible amount to ask of the taxpayer.
Thank you, Michael. Susan?
So just a little clarification on procedure. Not that numbers ever go down, but if it were to go down, by the time, like, say we vote this and then we get more information and we find out that we actually do have a little bit of fluff in the budget. When does that come out in the laundry? Does it come out before we do the debt exclusion, or is it too late at that point?
So this project will go on a BAN, which is a bond anticipation note. Fundamentally, it's a short-term, bank loan. Short-term in the sense that it's not permanent. It's a couple of up to a few years, and then once the project's completely done and you've got your spent number, then they'll bond it. So you just wouldn't, if the project ended up costing less, you just borrow it on the BAN and it wouldn't end up in the bond. If you don't borrow it on the BAN, you can't bond it. Just to be clear, if you don't spend it, you can't bond it.
Okay, so that's on that end of the spectrum. Then, and on the other end of the spectrum, if we find out that we can't live inside this budget, people keep using this term guardrail. Does that mean we have to revisit, the project and what we're doing and stay in that guardrail, or that this project just balloons into something bigger?
We'd have to revote it if it went any higher. So hopefully
Yeah,
they fit it in.
We would need to come back to town meeting to seek further authorization for whatever the differential is, assuming we couldn't get a grant to cover it. So this happened in Hingham. They voted 50. And even though they probably did like 5 years of intense work and feasibility studies, when it actually came in, it was at 52. And so they got state funding for the remaining 2 million. So they didn't have to go back and increase the debt exclusion, because it was just so hard for them to manage, even with all the studies and estimates, which is a little bit of what we're trying to get ahead of, because the longer you study it, the more expensive it just keeps getting higher and higher and higher, which it's tricky. So but Corey's right.
Yeah.
We'd have to go back to town meeting if we had to get a further appropriation, if we couldn't get a grant or other source of funding. It would probably be a state grant.
Right. So back to the initial question then. There's a couple things that make me feel like I am probably ready to vote it, and those answers given just now are part of it, but also the fact that we are dealing with an existing building that is not terribly old or told it's structurally sound, and I think that the changes that we're doing here are not terribly complex changes. So I feel a little comfortable in, the movement of those types of numbers. But the other thing is that I just, do have in my mind the 52 million spent on for Hingham, and it's 23 for Situate. And, that's just going to keep going up. And this is kind of opportunistic for the town, to act on this. And if it's how the public safety officials feel, this is the proper place for them, and they can function there, not only now but into the future, then I'm relatively comfortable considering voting now.
Okay. And I'll go as the last voting member. I agree with everything Michael Dick has said. I also recognize we're not going to get any of it prior to town meeting. And that's just where we are. So in that context, I am prepared to vote based on the best available information that I have or will have. Which is that which is in front of us at this time. Before I open it up for a motion, Ralph's a non-voting member, but I'm curious if there's any comment you want to make, Ralph.
I think it's probably the best alternative you have, to be perfectly honest with you. I would certainly, if I were enabled to vote, I would vote it. I do reflect on what Mike has said and others have said. It would be nice to know that there was a number above which we will not authorize above the 10.4 million for sure. But I do think it's probably necessary to do this, and I don't see an alternative, to be perfectly honest with you. So this one's relatively easier for me.
Okay. Chris, Michelle, the number's 10.4. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's accurate.
Sorry. Couldn't hear that.
Yes. 10,400,000. Yes.
Okay. Obviously if that moves in the next 3 weeks, we need to revisit the conversation. And with that, I would entertain a motion.
Motion for the capital budget, quasi capital budget committee to recommend approval of Article 7, police and fire station, for the amount of $10.4 million.
Anyone like to second?
Second.
Okay. We will do a roll call vote. Susan Franklin,
Susan Franklin, aye.
Francine Lyons,
Francine Lyons, aye.
Michael Dick.
Michael Dick abstain.
Thank you, Michael. Corey Evans.
Big leap of faith. Chris, Michelle, Chief, make it happen. Corey Evans, aye.
And Brian Host, I'll reiterate what Corey just said. From my perspective, we're voting in our confidence in this team to pull this off within this number. Please make it so and don't make us look silly in retrospect. But with all that said, Brian Host, aye.
Can I clarify something? Sorry, this is Francine. Corey, did you refer to it as Article 7? Maybe I'm looking at an older draft of the warrant.
I'm Article 7, draft 10, 11, 23. But I did state police and fire station, so
yep,
I think we're
that's
covered.
my fault. I'm looking at an older version. Sorry.
It may move.
Okay.
We are 4 minutes over my hard stop. I just need to go, or else I will not be able to take care of the stuff I need to take care of before tomorrow morning. So I will be exiting. Francine, are you taking notes still? I was taking notes as well. Can you take notes from here on out for me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. There may not be much to take, but Corey, thanks for your time and your patience.
You all.
Let's do a time check with everyone else. We're at the sort of agreed 8:30 hard stop. I'm certainly prepared to honor that if that's where people stand. I guess before we go, I'd just ask a very quick question so that we don't miss an opportunity. Do people feel like they have what they need to vote either of the two, not both, but either one of the two stabilization funds? Because if people feel like they have what they need, we should contemplate the opportunity to put votes next to those.
I have a number of questions and concerns on the whole concept of a stabilization fund and the impact to the taxpayer over time. And I am not comfortable with the sort of generalized tax increase that's in the long-term financial planning group's presentation. And I would want to get more information from either from the Board of Assessors or from the assessor herself on what the actual change is to our levy, going from 1180 per thousand to what for each of those items, so that we can figure what is the percentage change. So I'm not ready to delve into these, and I would hope that we would honor the hard stop. I'm certainly ready to meet again next week.
Okay. Susan?
I don't believe that I'm ready to vote on these either. I think that some of the language, there were some changes made that tightened things up, but I still feel like we felt strongly about some kind of a sunset clause, and I don't see one yet.
Okay, Francine?
I'm not ready either, and I do want to respect the hard stop. I've got to go as well.
All right. And I'm ready to vote these, but I respect that is not the consensus or the majority. So, and I am certainly ready to respect the hard stop. So, with that, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion. Second.
All right, roll call vote. Susan Franklin,
Susan Franklin, aye.
Francine Lyons,
Francine Lyons, aye.
Michael Dick.
Mike Dick, aye, and thank you everyone for a very good session, very helpful session.
And I echo that. This was a heavy lift from day one. I think we've worked very hard at it. We've made progress. We did the best we could with what we have tonight. There's more work to do. And hopefully we can achieve that work and give each one of these initiatives its due its due moment at town meeting, with support that's either earned or not. But we should do the work and make sure that we provide the best recommendation that we can. So thank you everybody for your patience dealing with a tricky set of circumstances and big asks. And with that, I vote aye to adjourn. So the time is 8:39 and the meeting is now adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.